What would success look like in 2025 for the Texas Longhorns? For this football team next year, what would they need to accomplish for you to deem it a success? That's what we're discussing on today's episode of Locked On Longhorns. What does success look like for the Texas Longhorns in 2025?
You are Locked On Longhorns, your daily podcast on the Texas Longhorns. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Locked On Longhorns, the show. Jonathan Davis, your host. Today's episode of Locked On Longhorns brought to you by FanDuel. Super Bowl 59 is here, and there's no better way to make every play more exciting than with FanDuel Sportsbook. New customers can bet just $5, and if you win, you'll score $200 in bonus bets. So download the app or head to FanDuel.com to get started. On today's episode of Locked On Longhorns, once again, what is success for Texas in 2025? What would they need to accomplish for you to feel good about the season next year? We discussed that. And then after that, I'll probably get into some YouTube comments. It's a Friday, so I'll probably get into some YouTube comments, read them, and react to them live on the show. All of that and more on today's episode of Locked On Longhorns, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. It's Super Bowl weekend, the Eagles and the Chiefs, so I hope everybody has a good weekend. I hope that every weekend for all 52 weeks of the year. But this weekend, wherever you're watching the Super Bowl, if you're watching the Super Bowl, I hope you have a good weekend, a safe weekend. I hope you enjoy the game. I hope you enjoy the halftime show. Kendrick Lamar should be lit. I hope you enjoy the commercials. I hope you have some really good food and you're with some really good people while you're doing it. So hope everybody has a good weekend. So we're talking about Texas in 2025. What does success look like for the Longhorns, right? Because, coming off a 5-7 season, 8-5 might not have been what you wanted in 2022. Not making the Big 12 championship might not have been what you wanted in 2022. But I think most Texas fans felt like, okay, that was a successful season because it showed growth, after one of the worst seasons in program history. Then the next season, you win the Big 12 and you make the college football playoffs. You obviously wanted to beat Washington and felt like you could have. You felt like you were right there. But you had to look at that as a successful season because it was a step up, right? Then last season, I'm not sure if all fans viewed it as successful, right? I mean, you kind of looked at it like, damn, running into Ohio State, they were the buzzsaw, but we felt like we were 1 yard away from tying that game and, maybe telling a different story. You get to the SEC championship game and you lose. A lot of fans felt like we should have won that game. But, first year in the SEC, essentially ran the table outside of playing Georgia and Ohio State. And you made it to the semifinals in the 12-team playoffs, which means you had to win 2 playoff games to get there. So overall, I would say that's a success, right? Obviously, none of these seasons ended how you wanted them to. But as a Texas fan, there's only one way the season can truly end how you want it to, and that's to win the national championship, right? So I would say the last 3 seasons have been successful for Texas. But now you have to raise the bar a little bit because for 2 straight years, you've gotten close. You've gotten on the brink, but you're not getting there. So you have to raise the bar for Texas because now a semifinal appearance in the playoffs is something we've seen before. It's something we've done before. We're trying to figure out how to get past that. So what would success look like for the Texas Longhorns this season? So let's start with the conference championship. Now, obviously, I don't believe a conference championship is a necessity to say that you had a great or successful season. When you look at it last year, Texas didn't win the SEC, but they ended up going further than Georgia in the playoffs. Notre Dame didn't have a conference championship game, and they went to the Natty. And Ohio State wasn't even in their conference championship game. And they went to the Natty and won it, right? Penn State, who lost to Oregon in their conference championship game, went further than Oregon did. A lot of that has to do with the bracket, but still, right? So obviously a conference championship really doesn't shape your season in any way. It'll more than likely, especially in, if Texas wins the SEC, it'll give you a bye. And Georgia didn't have Carson Beck, but that doesn't necessarily mean anything because they had a bye and lost the first game that they played. So Texas could have a successful season without winning the SEC. However, in my opinion, I think not winning the SEC next year would be a failure within itself. Could you still have a successful season? Of course. If they go win the Natty and they lost in the SEC championship game, I'm not going to be pissed off. I'm going to be happy as hell, right? Of course. But I look at it like you had every opportunity in the world to win the SEC your first year in the conference. And I'm the type of guy, I want every trophy we can get. I'm not one of those, I don't care about conference. No, I want it. I want it. I do. You know what I'm saying? I want it. And every fan that says they don't care about conference championships would be elated if we won the SEC. So please stop the cope. You know what I'm saying? You should have won it last year. And I feel like going into next season, once again, you are the best team in the SEC. I know anything can happen any given Saturday. You're going to have to, go against Georgia in the regular season. Georgia likely meets you there in the SEC championship again. I really don't see another team that's just on Texas and Georgia's level right now, right? I mean, you got teams like Tennessee and Alabama and South Carolina that are there. I don't think Ole Miss will be as good as they were last year. So you got teams that are there, but it seems like Georgia and Texas are a cut above the rest. So to me, next year is the year for Texas to take the SEC. They're going to be playing Gunnar Stockton most likely. I just haven't seen enough from them. Of course, we'll have a whole offseason and a season, but I just haven't really seen anything that makes me believe in Gunnar Stockton. I think Georgia. I mean, now Georgia did really bring in some really good players in the portal. They did bring in some really good players in the portal, and it's a team that's going to be able to run the ball and play defense. But my thing is, you're playing Georgia in the regular season. If you meet them again in the SEC championship, that would be 4 times in 2 years. At that point, you've had enough of a look at Kirby Smart and Georgia. Like, you have to find a way to beat them in the SEC championship if you play them. Any other team, I feel like Texas has the advantage outright. But if it's Georgia, regardless of what happens in the regular season matchup, you have to find a way to beat them in the SEC championship. Or to me, that would be a failure. Losing 3 out of 4 times or 4 out of 4 times, God forbid, to Georgia would absolutely, in a 2-year span, would absolutely be a failure. If we felt like Texas had the most talented roster all 4 games, that would be a failure. And most Texas fans, I've heard it all season, so don't waffle now. We feel like we're going to be better. We're going to be better at the quarterback position. So Texas should have every opportunity to win the SEC. Now, of course, Texas is going to make the playoffs. I'm not even going to waste my time on that 12-team playoff. If Texas doesn't make the playoffs at all, I mean, something went terribly wrong, but you're facing the same opponents this past year this season that you did this past season. A couple of teams are going to be better. I think Florida's going to be a lot better than they were last year. Maybe a couple of teams, but still, based on SEC standards and where those teams were last year, it's still going to be a fairly soft schedule, right? Texas is going to make the playoffs, I believe. So, obviously, you have to make the playoffs for it to be a successful season. But if Texas were to get to the semifinals again, would you deem that a success? Now, it largely depends on the bracket. Right? Because I mean, the way Oregon got smacked, you could say that's certainly a failure. But somebody had to lose in that round, right? Like Oregon or Ohio State, somebody had to lose in that round. And that was 2 teams that absolutely could have won the national championship. So if Texas just ends up running into a buzzsaw like they did against Ohio State next year in the semifinals, then maybe you have to say, okay, that team was just better, right? But based on what I'm seeing right now going into the season across the college football landscape, obviously things are going to change between now and, this time next year, January next year. I'm not sure that team is out there. And like I said, if we feel like Texas is going to be better because they're upgrading at the quarterback position, there shouldn't be any team that Texas can line up against next year and not have a chance. There were people that felt like we didn't have a chance against Ohio State. That shouldn't be the case next year against any team in college football. So if Texas makes it back to the semifinals, anytime you can make it to the last 4 in any sport, I think that's a good season. But we're at the point now where Steve Sarkisian has built this program to where a good season is not good enough because we've done it the last 2 years. So for me, if we get back to the semifinals and we lose in that round, that was not a successful season for Texas. And of course, if we get to the natty and lose it, we're going to be heartbroken and you're not going to feel like that's a success. But for me, it's natty or bust. It's not championship or bust. It's natty or bust because I'm willing to look at it as a step forward. And that's all you can ask for from this program, right? So many things can happen in a season. You may have a big injury you have to deal with. Anything can happen. But if this team can get to the national championship game, regardless of what happens in that game, I would be able to look at it as a success for the Texas Longhorns and take me some time to, decompress. But I would look at that as a successful season. Semifinals, no, because you've been there, done that. And if they got there again and lost again, we would ask, why can't this team get over the hump? So I believe for Texas to have a successful season next year, they have to be playing in the national championship game. And then as a sidebar for myself, I feel like they need to win the SEC. But whether they win the SEC or not, if they make it to the national championship game, I will say that Texas had a successful season. Anything less than the national championship, Texas did not have a successful season because, once again, Steve Sarkisian has built this program to the point where good just simply isn't good enough. Quick word from our sponsors, and then I spend the rest of the show reading and reacting to your YouTube comments. I haven't been looking at them as much as I did throughout the season, so it's going to be my first time reading a lot of them. Hopefully it's nothing too crazy. So Friday, isn't it? We discuss after the break. Today's episode of Locked On Longhorns brought to you by FanDuel. Super Bowl 59 is here. One game, two teams, endless possibilities, and there's no better way to make every play more exciting than with FanDuel Sportsbook. Whether it's predicting the first touchdown, calling the MVP, or even betting on the coin toss, FanDuel makes it easy to get in on the action. With live betting all game long, you can adjust your bets as the game unfolds and feel the thrill from kickoff to the final whistle. The live betting feature lets you stay involved no matter what happens on the field, and the app is super easy to navigate. Plus, knowing that you can place a $5 bet and potentially win $200 in bonus bets for the Super Bowl, that's the icing on the cake. Download the app or head to FanDuel.com to get started. Bet just $5, and if you win, you'll score $200 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com. Bet with FanDuel, official partner of Super Bowl 59. All right, let me get into these comments. I got to pull my phone out to do that, of course. See what y'all been saying on here, man. First comment on the SEC squad. Where is Jonathan Davis? I guess they didn't see my explanation. I'll give it again. Look, man, I work 8 hours a day. I get off at 8. They record at 8. I'm tired. So I don't always, want to get off at 8. And the first thing is like, let me go record again with the guys, right? You know what I'm saying? Let me go shoot shit with the guys. And I said it was my obligation to get on there and do it throughout the football season because I felt like we needed an expert to preview or talk about what happened in the games that involved Texas. Now that they're on there just making up topics and, like I said, just, taking 30 minutes away from their families, you know what I'm saying? I don't mean in any disrespectful way, but like now that they're just on there just kicking it, man, like I said, I get off at 8 after working 8 hours. Y'all have fun. Like I said, I'm finna go make me some dinner, watch Suits. I'm almost finished. I'm on season 8. You know what I'm saying? And, y'all be all right, man. I know they on there talking about Texas. That's what people do. They on there talking about Texas. Y'all be all right, man. But why not? I haven't seen that many white guys since my first Trump rally. I am the only black SEC host. Not that that matters. You know what I'm saying? I hope nobody takes offense to the comment I just read or my response to that. But I am the only black SEC host. So when I don't get on there, that's how the screen's going to look. All right. We need to see, this was in response to Steve Sarkisian being ranked the 4th best coach in college football. We need to see if Sark learns from his bonehead decisions like Ryan Day did. Did Ryan Day learn from his bonehead decisions? Because Chip Kelly is the one calling the plays. Now, obviously, there has to be some type of collaboration there, especially with Ryan Day being an offensive coach. And I guess it would depend on what bonehead decisions you would think Ryan Day made, right? Because in 2022, Ohio State had Georgia beat. All they had to do was make the field goal, and they missed it. So I wouldn't say that was Ryan Day's fault. That's the kicker's fault. Like, we got to be able to hold players accountable. So I'm not sure what boneheaded decision they made that year. I haven't really watched all 4 of the Ohio State Michigan games. I was on a plane this year when they played. So what I heard was they were, trying to, kind of win in the trenches against Michigan instead of using all their playmakers on the outside. So maybe that is something that they learned in the playoffs, because they definitely were airing it out, saying in the playoffs, as opposed to doing that against Michigan. I'm trying to remember how their season ended last year. Well, I guess they didn't have a chance at the playoffs because they didn't make the conference championship game. They had lost to Michigan. Yeah, so that makes sense. Okay. Yeah, I mean, let's just talk about Steve Sarkisian, I guess. Yeah, I think so. I think that, we always talk about players developing. We never talk about coaches developing, right? And I think that Steve Sarkisian is better as a coach now than he was when he got here in 2021, right? And I think that you continue to take the data that you get and you gain from each season, right? Not only how to manage a team, him as a play caller, how to call plays, what works. And so I think that we've seen development as a coach, right? The team wouldn't be better off. We wouldn't continue to be in this position of being a national championship every year if Steve Sarkisian wasn't learning and getting better as he goes. So, it just depends on what the bonehead decision is, right? Because there's always going to be a play call we disagree with. And hindsight is 2020. I always say that. And I was one of the ones that was most vocal about the toss play. But I also said if that play worked, we wouldn't have been talking about it. And there's going to be a play at some point next year. A lot of people questioned in 2023 when we didn't score against Oklahoma on the 1 yard line, like 3 straight runs up the middle. And then that screen pass to Xavier Worthy, when all 4 of those plays didn't work, we questioned Steve Sarkisian. You know what I mean? So there's going to be a play at some point next year that doesn't work. So I'm not sure if that's the bonehead decision. Outside of that, I'm not really sure if there was another decision Steve Sarkisian just didn't make this year, or made this year that went horribly wrong. Of course, people are going to say he should have played Arch Manning more. Maybe. I definitely think he could have played Arch Manning more. He could have put Arch Manning in more scenarios that probably would have helped Texas, especially with his dual threat ability. But I also think he had all the confidence in the world in Quinn Ewers. And I think the opportunities were there. I think the opportunities were absolutely there. Right? Even if you think we should have put Arch Manning in more against Ohio State, we were 1 yard away from tying that game. And, like Steve Sarkisian said in his his press conference, I'm not really a fan of coaches just diverting blame like that, or, throwing the players under the bus. But there are some angles, there are some replays where you look at it. If that play was blocked correctly, maybe it works. I would have gone to Jaden Blue there. I wouldn't have gone to Trey Wisner. But nonetheless, right, there's going to be some decisions, especially as a play caller, where, you just don't agree with Steve Sarkisian. But outside of that, I think boneheaded decisions. I think he made a lot of great decisions last year. I think he's made great decisions. I think he's become a way better coach over the last, 3-4 years. And, nothing tells me that he won't continue to get better next season. Next season might be the season he gets over the hump. And I also don't think that Ryan Day just made this. I've said this on my last episode. I don't think Ryan Day made this huge maturation as a coach, or took this huge step forward. I think he just won the championship. And when you win the championship, you become immortalized. But I don't think Ryan Day is still an elite coach. I think he just won the chip, So I think the next step for Steve Sarkisian is just to win the chip. I don't think that, you know what I mean? I don't think we'll look at him any differently between now and just winning the chip. So that's my thoughts on it. I don't know how you can have Ryan Day ahead of Sark just because he won a natty. Man was handed the keys to a Ferrari. Sark had to rebuild the program back to what it is. Herman didn't leave him a monster team like Day got, for sure. Definitely Texas Homer says a lot. Ryan Day was born on third base. So, Ryan Day definitely stepped into an Ohio State program and Ohio State football team, a roster that was really, really good. Steve Sarkisian stepped into a Texas program with a lot of holes, and they've basically built their programs to the same level. Obviously, Ohio State has gotten over the hump. I believe Texas will get there soon. But like I said, just, a couple of minutes ago, I don't think that Ryan Day is an elite coach in college football. They've talked about it. They spent $20 million on their roster. I mean, that roster is elite. Like, I think we'll look back at it in years when we can fully process it and say, damn, like all those players played at Ohio State at the same time, you know? And so I just think that that's what it is, right? And so I do believe that Steve Sarkisian is a better coach than Ryan Day at this point. I believe if you asked any Ohio State fan, would they rather have Steve Sarkisian or Ryan Day? The vast majority of them would say Steve Sarkisian. But that's what happens when you win a national championship. That's what happens when you win a championship, period. You're immortalized. You know what I'm saying? Like, I was about to say something crazy, but that's what happens when you're immortalized, right? Trent Dilfer is a Super Bowl champion. Dan Marino's not. You know what I'm saying? Like, but one of them has the ring. Like, and sometimes the ring is just the ultimate trump card. So I would say the majority of the country believes Steve Sarkisian is better than Ryan Day. But Ryan Day has a fat piece of ice on his finger that ends the conversation. All right, quick word from our sponsors, and then we get into more of your YouTube comments on the show. Today's episode of Locked On Longhorns also brought to you by PrizePicks. The big game is almost here, and there's no better way to make it even more exciting than with PrizePicks, the best place for daily fantasy sports. With over 10 million members and billions in winnings awarded, PrizePicks makes it fun and simple to get in on the action. Here's how it works. You pick more or less on at least 2 players' projections, and if you're right, you can win up to 1,000 times your cash. PrizePicks even has a free pick for the big game, where Patrick Mahomes only needs to throw 1 yard to win. Pair that with one more correct pick, and you're cashing out. Download the app today and use code LOCKEDONCollege to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. That's code LOCKEDONCollege for $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. PrizePicks. Run your game. All right. The media is having a field day trying to set up Arch in Texas for a fall because that would be even better for ratings and viewership. But they're going to be disappointed. Happy 3-year Jonathan. I appreciate that, Benjamin. I'll also say that Benjamin is on a list of my most optimistic subscribers. I would say that. Like, every time I read one of his comments, it's like very, you know what I mean? Like, I've never ever just seen a comment, like a negative comment from him. He's always very optimistic and loves his Texas Longhorns. So I appreciate that from you, Benjamin Finley. And yeah, I think that kind of is, I wouldn't say that ESPN is rooting and the media is rooting for Arch Manning to fail, because I think it's a great story either way. You know, like, I think it's a great story for the media if Arch Manning wins a championship. Now, negativity drives, you know, engagement. So obviously, if Arch Manning falls short, especially if he's the reason, then you're gonna get a ton of people in the comments. Oh, I thought he was this. Oh, the Manning could, you know what I mean? Like, so it definitely, negativity drives engagement. But I also think Arch Manning winning a championship in college is something that the media would never shut up about. So I think either way, they're going to be able to leech off of Arch and just make this a huge story, you know? Um I just think the thing is that there aren't a lot of huge storylines in college sports, really, ever, because there's so much turnover. You know, it's like every time you start to really get attached to a player or you start to really follow a player, they're on their way to the National Football League. And it's rare that you see 3-year starters. So especially, it's like a player like Arch, like, he might start for 1 year. And so, you know, I think this has just been building since, like, you know, Arch was in middle school, you know, and now they have the opportunity to fully unleash, you know, because they were trying to do it when Quinn was the starter, right? Like, any little thing is like, is Arch this, is Arch that? Um, but now they just are able to fully latch on to Arch Manning. And like I said, outside of Arch Manning, what are some big player involved storylines going into next season? Like, Jeremiah Smith and Colin Simmons are 2 flat out dogs. They're going to be in college for the next 2 years. But people aren't rushing to their phones to read content about Jeremiah Smith and Colin Simmons. People aren't rushing to, you know, various sites to click on things that involve Jeremiah Smith and Colin Simmons. So when you're talking about college football, I think Arch Manning is just by far the biggest story. You know, it's not just about the media trying to set up Arch. I think Arch by far is the biggest story. Even think about it at the quarterback position. What is the next biggest storyline involving a quarterback in college football next year outside of Arch Manning? I mean, maybe DJ Lagway, maybe. Like, and even then, you're talking about Arch Manning up here, DJ Lagway way down here, right? Like, to me, Arch Manning is just by far the biggest storyline involving a player in college football next season. And then he's at the University of Texas, so you get that tax as well. But yeah, like I said, I don't think it's the media trying to set up Arch. I think it's just the media trying to leash off of Arch because Arch Manning is by far the biggest story in college football next season. And I know he's been at Texas for like 3 years, so we've kind of tempered our, excitement a little bit, but it's just the biggest story in college football. It just is what it is. Arch Manning is already a living legend, and it is what it is. There you go. Like, I said that he was always going to get this level of attention just based on his uncles and his grandpa, right? But he's done enough to continue and maintain the hype based on what he did at high school and what we've seen in his short tenure at the University of Texas. The kid looks like a baller, right? And so, like I said, he's just the biggest story by far going into college football next season. And, if one thing the media is going to do, they're going to hang on to that, right? Like, people have said, why does the media talk about LeBron so much? Why does the media talk about Steph so much? Because they carry ratings, right? Arch Manning is going to carry ratings next year for all of these platforms. When they put Arch Manning in their headline, it's going to get more clicks than any other story. It's like Caitlin Clark. You know what I mean? Like, there's no emotion there. It's all business. Arch Manning is just going to bring these outlets more clicks than any other player would. That's all it is. Haha, we haven't seen anything yet. Arch lit it up for 2 games, and odds makers were favoring him to win the Heisman. So many eyes are about to be on the Longhorns. Wow. Yep, there you go. Like I said, Arch Manning's just the biggest story in college football, and he just happens to be the starter for your favorite football team. And that's how it's going to be the entire time next season until he declares for the NFL draft. But thank you for tuning in to another episode of Locked On Longhorns, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Once again, enjoy your weekend, your Super Bowl weekend. We'll see you on Monday. Hook 'em. Peace.